All right, guys, we are officially on episode 5 of Agatha All Along. It is, I guess now, it's over halfway done. So we're here to talk about it. Agatha All Along wraps up on October 30th, I believe, or 29th? 30th, I think 30th, with episodes 8 and 9. And, we're here to talk about Agatha episode 5. This is going to be a full spoiler discussion. So if you have not seen Agatha All Along episode 5, there are some spoilers in this episode, so I would recommend just putting this video or this segment or the podcast to watch later, and then coming back once you have seen Agatha All Along episode 5. Let's get into this. So, just like I always do, I like to recap some of my thoughts so you know exactly where I'm coming from. Recapping my thoughts on the previous episodes, I thought that episodes 1 and 2 were really quite good, honestly. I think especially episode 1 was fun, and I think that episode 2 was, enjoyable, although perhaps not nearly as good as episode 1, but I thought it was enjoyable. I thought episode 3 introduced us to this format, right, of the Trials of the Witch's Road, and I thought, okay, I talked about this in my episode 3 reaction, or spoiler discussion, that I thought this concept could get tired pretty quickly, but for this episode, I thought it was actually quite entertaining. Fast forward to episode 4, and I think that the format got tired pretty quickly already. And I think that what episode 4 was with, the singing, the band. Yeah, I don't think it was for me. Because I know a lot of people have told me, and people in the comments have mentioned that, no, I really like the band part of episode 4. And that's awesome. That's, I really love that really resonated with a lot of you guys. Because I think that's what it's for, right? I think, Jack Schaefer was like, this is going to really, a lot of people are going to enjoy this band segment. So it just didn't really land for me. So, and the other distinction, I suppose, or so just something I talked about in the last spoiler discussion is that I think for me, right, one of the things that I'm not quite enjoying about Agatha All Along, at least with episode 3 and 4, and then, I assumed episode 5 would follow suit, and it did. I mean, it changed it up a little bit, sure, but it basically followed the same formula, is that I think there's a difference for me between a format and a formula. And I used one of my favorite shows, The West Wing, as an example. The West Wing has a format, right? You know that generally there's going to be multiple storylines with the different characters split up, and usually there's some big conflict, and either it gets resolved at the end and there's some kind of hopeful message, or it kind of leaves it ambiguous, but you know that different characters are dealing with different problems, and there's sort of an overarching conflict. But it can take many different shapes and sizes. It could be a bill trying to pass through Congress. It could be a government shutdown. It could be an impeachment trial. It could be all sorts of different things, right? Agatha All Along is really not playing with a format. It's playing with a formula. It's very formulaic, especially episodes 3, 4, and 5, because the formula is something kind of chaotic happens at the beginning of the episode on the Witch's Road. They then go into a house. There's a trial. They all have to work together. Somebody usually dies. Agatha, learns a lesson or something. They exit on the Witch's Road, and then they go on their merry way, and it's chaotic to begin the next episode. This is literally a formula that episodes 3, 4, and 5 have used. Now, like I said, it doesn't have to mean that I don't enjoy some parts of these episodes. I enjoyed a lot of episode 3. I thought, I'm not going to say I enjoyed a lot of episode 4, but that's just me personally. And episode 5, I will say I enjoyed bits and pieces of it, especially the trial part. Like, not especially the trial part, but in the trial part, there were bits and pieces in particular that I enjoyed. I thought that the last 5 minutes of this show, or of this episode, had some interesting things that were not quite set up, and then also some interesting things that will probably be paid off in next episode, one would hope. You can't end the episode with revealing that it's Billy Maximoff. We would assume, they never explicitly say, but Billy Maximoff, and not pay that off. Also, how did he get powers? How did he remember how to use magic, etc., etc.? There are all sorts of things that this show needs to answer. Luckily, what this show has in its favor is that usually for Disney Plus MCU shows or Star Wars shows, we're asking these questions in the second to last episode, and then they just don't pay it off in the next episode because it's the finale. Like, how could you pay off all these different questions? This is, I think, at the very least, it's better because now you're asking these questions in the midway point, and then you have plenty of time, we hope, to flesh out these different things as we go along. So, anyways, we'll get to the teen Billy reveal at the very end of the segment. But let's start out here, and the first thing I always check, just for my own curiosity, is how long these episodes are. And I checked, I always skip the previously on, even though I caught a tiny bit of it, and it was the scene from WandaVision where she's taking the power from the other witches. So I kind of knew, okay, there's going to be something about her backstory here with the witches and Salem, and I knew that. But that's the reason specifically why I skipped the previously on, because I don't want to know what kind of things are being hinted at towards, for the coming episode I'm about to watch. It's not like I'm not going to watch the episode. I'm going to watch the episode. So Salem, the Salem witch trials, we're going to be playing some part in it. And sure enough, the episode opens and the Salem 7 are coming. And, for some reason, they weren't as creepy as they were in episode 2. I thought in episode 2 they were quite scary, actually. And maybe it's just the way that they were shot in episode 2 versus in episode 5, but they were just kind of scuttling around, and I don't know, it wasn't as scary as I thought it probably should have been. But the Salem 7 are there on the Witch's Road, and they're coming after Agatha, I guess. I did think that there was a pretty funny line when they're talking about, the Salem 7, I guess, are the daughters or the children of the witches that Agatha took the power from. And there's a funny line where Agatha says, "Mercy is overrated," and then she says, "Let's go." And I thought that was kind of funny, actually. It was a quick line, but it made me chuckle as she said it. So that was pretty funny. But yeah, I mean, it was dynamic. At least it was, things were happening. It was a little more interesting. There's some danger on the Witch's Road, but then, what always pulls me out of the show is that the MCU has generally been pretty grounded, right? And I say that even a little bit in jest, because when we get to the magical parts of the MCU, it's not like when Doctor Strange, the furthest he'll go is he'll pluck a little bit of Thor's hair out as he makes a spell, or Spider-Man's hair. But it's not like every time he conjures a sling ring, or he has the sling ring portal, or he casts a spell or whatever, or uses the time stone, that he has to start muttering in Latin, and he just has to spin around in circles 6 times. I think all that stuff is just kind of silly to me. So the fact that this show is really leaning into it, I'm just not a fan of it, honestly. When they had to get the brooms and they start spinning around and saying things, I was like, this looks really silly to me. Because I think part of the fun of the MCU's magic thus far has just been that it's just part of the fabric of the universe, and there are some people that can use it, tap into it. It's almost like energy, and it's not like, Latin, just random Latin things, and spinning in circles, and holding hands, and, Ouija boards, which we'll get to Ouija boards. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of that. And they're using this ritual to get to broomsticks, and again, I think, on top of just it being a little bit silly to me, although I will say it does give off, at least towards the beginning, some Harry Potter vibes, which is fun. I think it's fun. I haven't seen people riding a broomstick since Harry Potter, which has been a long time, so that's cool. That's fun. It does look incredibly fake, I think, when they're in the sky. Maybe that's just me, but when they're floating in the sky, I was like, no, they're just kind of sitting on something, and there's a green screen here. But whatever. It's something, And then they get into the trial and they head into the house, and it was something, like I said, following the formula, something kind of interesting happens at the beginning of the episode, and then they are on their way to the next trial. So yeah, the formula, it's getting a little bit old. I have reason to hope that in episode 6 and onward that they're not just going to rehash this formula, because you've revealed some interesting stuff at the end of this episode, but we'll see. I mean, who knows? We'll have to see. So then we get into this trial, and we have to use a Ouija board. And again, I think it's fine. Apologies for the background noise, by the way. There's some stuff going on outside. I think it's fine that, like, if you want to use, things from other horror films or whatever, I think it's fine. It's totally fine. The problem I have with this is it's almost like a bunch of fans of horror movies are just trying to point out things, or fans of movies are just trying to point out things that they want the audience to also be like, hey, look, it's this thing. Let's look at this thing. There's the thing. It's a Ouija board, because Ouija boards are scary in movies. And I mean, yeah, I didn't watch those Ouija movies, to be fair, and I heard they were pretty bad. Maybe that's wrong. Maybe I'm thinking of something else, but I thought I remembered them being pretty bad from what people said. And even despite that, the trailers freaked me out, right? Like, I'm not a big horror person. Ouija boards, bare minimum, should freak me out, no matter what. And nothing about this Ouija board was scary. It was just comical. And maybe that's what they're going for, in which case, that's great. I just have to acknowledge that it's just not not for me, because I said at the beginning, if you're going to go for horror, please go for horror, even if I'm not the target audience for that. And it doesn't seem like that's really what they're doing, not since episode 2 and episode 3, really. Have there been, because I think the Agatha crawling around thing, even you have to understand, I get scared at a lot of things. I'm not the target audience for horror. But even I was watching that going, this is a little silly, isn't it? Isn't it? I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Maybe you guys were freaked out and I just have no soul. Maybe. I don't know. Anyways, they start using the Ouija board and it spells out Mrs. Hart. And when it spelled out Mrs. Hart, I was like, wait a second. That doesn't make sense. And sure enough, it's Agatha faking it. So yeah, there is that. They ask who's there and it says Death. There are a bunch of rumors that Rio Vidal is playing Death, but it seems like Agatha was controlling the board anyways. So we'll see. Maybe she seems to know who Rio Vidal really is, because I'm sure she's not just Rio Vidal. And so I'm sure she probably is Death. I don't know what that means. I suppose that's interesting. But again, we'll just have to see how it's executed. So the witches then start turning on Agatha because apparently the Ouija board says to punish Agatha. And then she is on the ceiling and then she starts crawling around and her skin looks crazy. And yeah, and then there's a ghost because there's Agatha's mom is a ghost now. And I guess the MCU has ghosts now. I get somebody needs to explain to me all the different afterlives that the MCU has. Like there is Valhalla. We saw Heimdall, we saw Jane Foster there. And I guess there are other out of the Soul Realm, for example, with the Infinity Stones, and there are ghosts in the MCU, which are interesting. So there is that. The then there's this scene where Agatha tries to draw out the magic, or I guess Alice was trying to protect Agatha, and then Agatha, claims she doesn't know what she's doing, but then she draws out the magic from Alice, and the CGI here looks pretty fake. I'm not gonna lie, like especially Alice's magic, it looks incredibly fake to me. And that's a little concerning because I'm sure there's going to be some big CGI stuff happening later on. And I hope that it looks a little bit better. So yeah, I guess Agatha at this point was taking her power, taking Alice's power. And then also apparently Nicholas Scratch is here. So Death and Nicholas Scratch are there. And that never really gets resolved. Maybe it'll get resolved in the next episode, but we'll have to see about that. Alice is dead. Rest in peace, Alice. We hardly knew you. I think that's one of the problems with this show for me, is that they want us to, to laugh at the sort of shticky, not gimmicky, that's the wrong word. It's not gimmicky, it's just sort of the parody elements of the different shows and the different genres and the different elements of different genres. And that's fine. We're meant to enjoy them and we're meant to have fun and have, be it like a popcorn, have it be like a popcorn kind of television show. But then you have these scenes, right, where Agatha seems so hurt by the fact that, people are betraying her or whatever, and maybe that's just a ruse, maybe that's just a farce, because at the end of the episode she seems to do a 180 again, so maybe she's faking it, so who knows. But then there's a scene like Teen just so distraught over the death of Alice, and I'm like, where in this show have we seen, other than just Teen being nice to Alice and vice versa and maybe talking to her a couple of times, when have we shown anywhere in these 30-minute episodes that Teen had any real connection to Alice? I don't know. It just didn't land with me, if that makes sense. So, yeah, they escaped the trial, and then the interesting stuff starts to happen, just like it did in the last episode, where we start to learn more about Rio and Agatha, even though we didn't get any payoff for that in this episode, which I was bummed out about, which, makes me think that probably next episode we won't get anything else about Teen. I find that hard to believe, but based on the way that these Disney Plus shows have been going, I don't know. I really don't know. But honestly, when Teen confronts Agatha, and then Agatha smiles, and she says, "Are you sure?" That was her smile, and that scene was scarier than anything in the entire show thus far. It was creepy. Catherine Hahn, the way that she can kind of contort her face to make that smile look even bigger somehow, is really scary. Honestly, it is quite terrifying. And then she says the line that I think will probably stand out from this episode. She says, "You look so much like your mother." So, okay, she knows who he is. And I think it's interesting now to reveal at the midway point of this series that she knows more than she's letting on, which I think we knew that. But I think the question is, the show is called Agatha All Along, which we haven't paid that much attention to the title thus far. But I think it's interesting to think about what is it all along? What is she behind, in this series? Is it just a clever parody or a clever retaking of the title of the song in WandaVision, or is there something that she's actually behind in this series? And it looks like we're getting a little bit of a hint of that. Maybe when Teen comes to rescue her from the spell that she sent him somehow, or Nicholas Scratch sent him, or I don't know. Who knows? Like, maybe I'm sure she had something to do with this, because obviously Wanda's kids were not quote unquote real. So maybe we'll get a flashback where just before the hex comes, Agatha is in the hex and she, or the hex ends, I should say. She takes Billy and something happens. I don't know. She manifests him as real or something like that. I don't know. I'm sure we'll figure this out eventually. I just hope it's in the next episode rather than being in episode 9, if that makes sense. But she says, "You look so much like your mother." Does he? Maybe. I don't know. I personally don't see it, but maybe. I'm only calling that out here because I don't really care about casting. Like, you don't have to cast someone who looks exactly like Elizabeth Olsen, but Agatha did call it out, so I was wondering about that. And then the show's getting interesting. So this is Billy, and now we have to just figure out why, and I'm sure it'll be in episode 6. And I again, like I said, I guess it's better that it was in episode 5 that this happened rather than episode 8 of the show. Also wanted to note that Rio Vidal is nowhere to be seen, I think. I might have missed it, but I don't think she's anywhere. So, interesting. And the episode ends with a blue crown on Teen's head, on Billy's head, and then he finds his magic again. So I wonder where that came from. I wonder if he had known all this time. I think that, there's an interesting thing that could be happening here, or maybe Teen is the villain. Billy is the villain of this show, and he is in league with Rio, who is Death, or something like that. Again, we saw Rio enter the illusion, the hex in Agatha in the first episode of Agnes of Westview, and we saw then Teen also infiltrate the Vision. And while he and Rio don't seem to have that much in common, who knows? Right? Who knows? Joe Locke recently gave an interview where he said he had to play many different versions of the character through the auditions, and he learned more and more about this character and how he'd have to play a different side of him as the show progressed. So we'll see. I would personally be in favor of a twist like this, where Agatha knew more than she was letting on, but then also Teen is the bad guy, and he's in league with Rio somehow. And if Rio is Death or Mephisto or whatever, I don't really care. But I think that there's something interesting there. I'm a little bummed that it took this long to get to something interesting like this. And if the show just goes right back next episode to, well, it can't, right? It can. I don't know, because Agatha, Lilia, and Jennifer Kale are buried in the mud, and I'm sure they're going to get out in the next episode. But if the next episode is them just getting out of the mud and then running to the next house, and Teen and Rio are outside the house or something like that, and they're doing the next trial, I would just be a little bit bummed, because for me personally, the formula is getting a little bit old. And, I want to say, as I wrap up my thoughts on this episode, is that I'm not here just to be negative for the sake of being negative. I'm here to point out the facts. Not facts. I shouldn't say facts, because these are all just my own subjective opinions, but just to point out the ways in which the show is not working for me personally. But that doesn't mean the show doesn't have to work for you, because I'm sure there are a lot of people who love the first 5 episodes, all of them, holistically, individually, of Agatha all along. And I'm just not one of them. I think that the show has its ups and it has its downs. To me, and I know nobody wants to hear me talk about Rings of Power anymore. It's fine. I'm going to talk about it. I think for me, it follows a similar trajectory of Rings of Power, where episode 1, I really liked. I think I liked episode 1 of Rings of Power a lot more than I did episode 1 of Agatha all along. But still, the next few episodes were honestly stumbles for me for Rings of Power. But then the show picked it up. And it picked it up in a dramatic way. And so if episodes 6, 7, and 8, and 9 come out, and they're all really solid as we're building towards the final conflict here, I'm on board, right? I think we start to hit a tipping point if episode 6 is kind of like this, if episode 7 is kind of like this, maybe episode 8 is really good, and then episode 9 is kind of like this. Then I think Agatha all along falls in the bucket of, I don't know, projects like She-Hulk and projects like The Marvels and Secret Invasion and whatnot. But we'll have to see. We will have to see about that. So guys, let me know what you thought about episode 5 of Agatha all along. Did you enjoy it? Is it the best of the entire series for you? Is it the worst? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts as we continue the conversation in the comments.